He hated love. To him, love was weakness, a trick for the foolish. Alexander Cole, the billionaire with a heart of stone, believed women were nothing more than trophies. He lived with pride so thick it blinded him, and no one, absolutely no one, had ever dared to challenge him. Medium skin tone waving hand sign, welcome back to the channel, my friends. If you love emotional stories filled with twists and lessons, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Now, let's dive into the story. That night, Alexander was restless. Another glass of wine, another laugh echoing through his empty mansion, another reminder that money could buy anything, except peace. He decided to take his usual drive through the neon-lit streets, searching for a woman who would keep his bed warm and his pride satisfied. But fate was waiting for him at the corner of a lonely street. There she stood, a young woman in plain clothes, clutching her bag tightly as though the world was pressing down on her. Her eyes told a story of pain, of desperation, yet there was something different about her. She wasn't dressed to impress, nor did she look like she belonged in the line of women who usually caught his attention. Alexander smirked. To him, she was just another game, another chance to prove that no woman could resist him. He slowed his car, leaned back in his leather seat, and said the words he always said when hunting pride. "Get in." She hesitated. Her fingers trembled, her lips parted, but she didn't move. Something in her hesitation struck him in a way he didn't understand. For the first time, Alexander felt a ripple in his stone-cold confidence. And though he didn't know it yet, this woman would be the beginning of his greatest undoing. Her hesitation lasted only a few seconds, but to Alexander, it felt like a challenge. Women never hesitated with him. They usually rushed into his car, blinded by the shine of wealth and the promise of comfort. Yet this one, she lingered, her eyes scanning him like she was searching for something more than money, something deeper. Finally, with a deep breath, she stepped forward and slid into the seat. The scent of leather and cologne wrapped around her, almost suffocating compared to the dusty street she had just left behind. She clutched her bag like it was a shield, her gaze fixed on the glowing city lights instead of the man beside her. Alexander watched her carefully. She wasn't like the others. No heavy perfume, no exaggerated smiles, no desperate chatter to impress him. She sat in silence, her posture stiff, her breathing uneven. He almost smirked at the thought. Was she nervous, or was she simply not impressed by him? Either way, it caught his interest. "Relax," he said finally, his voice deep and commanding. "I don't bite unless I want to." He expected her to blush, to giggle, to melt like all the others. But she didn't even flinch. Instead, she whispered something so faint, he barely caught it. "I don't belong here." Those words struck him in a way he didn't like. Alexander prided himself on control. Control of people, of situations, of emotions. But this girl's quiet defiance unsettled him. And though he brushed it off with a laugh, something inside him stirred. He didn't know why, but this night was already different. The ride to Alexander's mansion was silent, except for the hum of the engine and the faint sound of the city fading behind them. The girl sat stiffly, her fingers tangled together on her lap. Unlike others, she didn't try to impress him with chatter or nervous laughter. She simply stared out the window, her thoughts locked away where he couldn't reach them. When the car rolled to a stop at the gates of his estate, she couldn't help but glance up. The mansion rose like a fortress, glass walls and marble pillars shimmering under the floodlights. It wasn't just a house, it was a kingdom, and Alexander was its king. Yet, to her, it didn't feel like home. It felt cold, empty. Inside, the staff greeted them with bowed heads. The girl's eyes darted around at the luxury, gold chandeliers, priceless paintings, a staircase carved like something out of palace. Still, her face didn't soften with her like Alexander expected. Instead, she looked even more out of place, as though the shine of the mansion only reminded her of how different her life was. "Make yourself comfortable," Alexander said, loosening his tie as he poured himself a drink. He watched her closely, waiting for the usual signs: curiosity, excitement, greed. But she only sat quietly on the edge of the sofa, clutching her bag like she was afraid to let go. It frustrated him. He was Alexander Cole, the man no woman ever resisted. Yet here she was, sitting in his house, untouched by his wealth, unaffected by his charm. For the first time in years, Alexander felt something strange bubbling inside him. Curiosity. And curiosity, he knew, was dangerous. Alexander set down his glass and walked slowly toward her. His eyes studied her face, soft but determined, fragile yet unyielding. He leaned against the arm of the sofa and smirked. "You don't need to sit like a guest," he said smoothly. "You're here for me, aren't you?" She didn't answer. Her grip on her bag tightened, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of fear cross her face. But it wasn't the kind of fear he was used to, the fear of losing luxury or opportunity. This was different. This was fear mixed with shame, as if being in that room was breaking her from the inside. He leaned closer, lowering his voice to the tone he used to melt hearts. "You don't need to be nervous. I'll take care of you tonight." Her eyes snapped up to his, and her words cut through the air like a blade. "I can't." Alexander froze. No woman had ever said that to him. No woman had ever dared to resist him. Not in his mansion, not when he held the power of wealth in his hands. His pride stung like fire. For the first time, Alexander Cole wasn't in control. The silence that followed her refusal was deafening. Alexander's pride burned. No one, absolutely no one, had ever dared to say no to him. He leaned back slowly, his smirk faltering, his mind trying to process the moment. Was this some kind of game? Was she testing him? But when his eyes met hers again, he saw no game. Her gaze was steady, but her lips trembled. She was afraid, yes, but she was also firm. It wasn't the kind of refusal born from arrogance. It was a kind of refusal born from pain. For the first time, Alexander didn't know what to do. He had expected laughter, eagerness, even greed. He had expected her to be like the countless others who walked willingly into his arms. Instead, she sat there on the edge of his sofa, clutching a bag like it contained her very soul. "Why did you come then?" he finally asked, his voice sharper than he intended. "If you weren't ready, why get in my car?" Her eyes dropped to the floor, and for a brief second, he saw it, the shadow of desperation hidden behind her silence. She wanted to answer. She wanted to explain. But she swallowed her words, stood to her feet, and whispered, "I'm sorry." Then, without waiting for permission, she turned toward the door. Alexander didn't stop her. He could have. He should have. But something in his chest told him to leave. Sleep abandoned Alexander. He tossed and turned in his king-size bed, his thoughts circling back to her face, her trembling lips, and that one word that had pierced through his pride, "I can't." It wasn't rejection that stung him. It was a mystery behind it. Why had she come with him at all, only to resist at the very last moment? By day, he drowned himself in meetings, contracts, and boardrooms filled with sharp suits and polished smiles. Yet even in the middle of business deals, he caught himself staring at nothing, hearing her soft whisper in his head. For a man who prided himself on control, the loss of focus infuriated him. He tried to convince himself she was just another girl. Disposable. Forgettable. But when he reached for his phone to call one of his usual companions, he found no desire. The thought of another woman in her place suddenly felt empty, hollow, even repulsive. At night, he stood by the glass walls of his penthouse, staring out at the city lights. Millions of people moved below, yet none of them mattered. None of them could answer the one question that burned inside him. Who was she, really? Alexander's obsession grew. He sent his driver to scout the same streets, ask questions in whispers, and even lowered himself to visiting places he had never set foot in, dirty corners of the city where desperation lived. But no one seemed to know her. His friends noticed his distraction. At a business dinner, one of them laughed. "Cole, you look like you've seen a ghost. Did a woman finally get to you?" The table erupted in laughter. Alexander smirked, but inside, the words cut deep. For once, the proud billionaire had no comeback. Days turned into weeks. He hated how powerless he felt, but something in his gut told him he had to see her again. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was need. She had cracked something in him, and he couldn't move forward without understanding why. And then, one morning, fate intervened. Outside a shabby pharmacy, he spotted her. Her clothes were worn, her hair tied back carelessly, and her face pale with exhaustion. She wasn't the same trembling girl he remembered. She looked even more fragile, as though life itself was crushing her. She froze when she saw him, her eyes widening in disbelief. "You," she whispered, clutching her bag tighter. She looked ready to run, but Alexander blocked her path. "Why?" His voice was low but firm. "Why did you get into my car that night if you had no intention of going through with it?" His pride burned, but beneath it was something else, an ache he couldn't explain. Her lips trembled, and for a moment she stayed silent. But then, as though the weight was too heavy to carry any longer, her words spilled out. She told him the truth. How she had never done anything like that before, how it was her first and only night on the streets. Not because she wanted to, but because she had no other choice. Her mother was dying. A weak heart, the doctors said. A transplant was the only hope, and the cost was more than she could ever dream of earning. She had worked 2 jobs, begged for help, sold what little they had, but it wasn't enough. That night, when Alexander found her, she had been desperate enough to sacrifice her dignity for the chance to save her mother. Alexander's chest tightened. He, who had broken so many women's egos for sport, now stood before one whose pride had been crushed not by him, but by life itself. Alexander didn't speak right away. He just stared at her, the weight of her confession pressing on him like a storm. For a man who believed money could solve everything, he had never considered that money could also be the reason someone broke themselves. Without telling her, he made his choice. That very evening, he called his private doctor and arranged everything. A world-class surgeon, a fully equipped hospital, every cost covered. He didn't ask her permission. He simply did it. When she found out, she wept, at first with disbelief, then with gratitude so raw it shattered the walls around his heart. "Why?" she asked him, her voice breaking. "Why would you do this to me?" Alexander didn't know how to answer. He only knew that for the first time in his life, he wanted nothing in return. No pride, no games, no power, just a chance to do something good, something real. And though he didn't say it out loud, deep inside, he knew the truth. She had saved him long before he saved her. Her mother's surgery was a success. The recovery was long, but every day, Alexander found himself there, sometimes in secret, sometimes openly, watching her sit faithfully by her mother's bedside. She no longer looked fragile to him. She looked strong, selfless, and beautiful in a way no diamonds or designer dresses could match. For a man who thought love was weakness, he now saw it as the purest form of strength. She had been willing to sacrifice herself to save her mother. And he, who once prided himself on breaking women, had been broken and rebuilt by her. Weeks later, as her mother smiled again for the first time in months, Alexander finally spoke the words he never imagined saying. "You changed me. You're the first person who ever made me want to be more." She looked at him, tears glistening in her eyes. "And you're the first person who showed me kindness when I had nothing left." Their story didn't end in a grand party or flashy proposal. It ended quietly, with 2 souls who found each other in the middle of brokenness. A billionaire who thought he couldn't love, and a woman who taught him that love was worth everything.